Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Fisher. It's an unfortunate reality that trust in salespeople is at an all-time low. A HubSpot poll recently found that only 4% of respondents consider salespeople trustworthy. And a Forrester study found that 68% of buyers don't even want to interact with a sales rep at all. What's happened? Well, our guest today argues that there's been a generational shift among buyers which demands a revamp of the way we do sales. Neal Tricarico is an expert on the art of building and leading an extraordinarily successful sales team. He's worked with an impressive list of clients from Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins to Larry Keck and Ryan Dice. He's the co-founder and CEO of Ultimate Growth Incorporated, a business services and consulting firm helping companies scale their sales teams using methods that actually work with the way buyers want to interact today. Neal, what a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's great to be here, Jonathan, and great to be reconnected with you, my man.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's the first thing I want to ask you. We've got, there's some parts of our background we share in common. You've got a fantastic background. You've gone on and done some great things. How did it all get started? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was blessed to come up in sales and maybe less blessed in terms of coming up in a different time of sales, that late 90s, early 2000s, Glengarry, Glenn Ross, coffees for closers. And while I excelled in sales and software sales early on in my career, I really struggled with that. I was a top performer every team I was on, but each night I'd go home and I'd have to kind of shower off who I was, right? A lot of hard closing, a lot of ringing gongs, manipulation techniques to overcome objections. And, I was fortunate enough when I moved down here to San Diego and had the opportunity to lead Deepak Chopra's sales organization and then meet Tony Robbins. And then ultimately when our paths crossed through our work together with Chet and Tony, did that transformation occur around serving clients around what matters most to them. Right. Yeah. And really, truly understanding their needs, their wants. And it was a powerful time and a great opportunity for us to meet and connect.
Yeah, for sure. Those were some really, really heady days. Chet Holmes, author of The Ultimate Sales Machine. For our audience, go pick it up if you don't have a copy already. It's one of those classics. He was in rebuilding mode. He'd gotten out of consulting for a bit, wrote a couple of movies, got them produced, kind of cool, came back in, very small team, and came in kind of early. I don't know if there was more than a couple of dozen of us when you came in, and we grew that thing to 300 souls, and I think we went from 3 million to 30 million in about 3 years or so. Tremendous trajectory of growth. We all learned a ton. Chet was always known as kind of a closer kind of guy. It's interesting that you learned what you just stated while working in the Chet organization. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting piece that you've mentioned. My hypothesis is that was more because around the time of sales and also that confluence of the time of sales, which was like closing and all the things that I just mentioned. And then also Chet was such a high energy guy. And you remember this, one of his most important principles was pig-headed discipline. Yeah. And he was so disciplined and so intense. It is my belief that personality, if you will, had others believe that was his approach in sales, that he was hard closing and such. But I had the opportunity through my experience of being on that sales team, being the top producer on that sales team, and then ultimately leading the team that moved forward to sell Business Mastery, to spend intimate time with Chet. And I'll share a story with you. Early on when we were selling for that very first event, the Ultimate Business Mastery Summit, I still have the binder back there. I was about middle of the road and I wasn't following Chet's approach. And, every night we'd get on these calls and do these hot seats. And he pulled me aside. He's like, what is it? What is your resistance? Why are you so resistant to following this process? And I said, I've never really like scripts. I've never associated with scripts. It's not my style. And he said, this isn't a script for us to manipulate and get people to do stuff. It's a framework to enable you to get deep, to go through discovery. And he challenged me. He said, what if you just did it tomorrow and you followed it to a T? What would happen? On that day, I enrolled 5 people and quickly moved ahead to the top producer. And I'm just going to go on a little riff here. But then when I became the sales leader of that team and had the one-on-ones with him, that's when I really discovered that underneath that gruff, intense, hardcore exterior, that his process really was about connecting with other people. Like, he flipped that consultative pyramid that spent very little time on establishing rapport and asking questions and a lot of time on closing and negotiating and overcoming objections. And he's the one who flipped that and said, hey, people buy from people they like and trust. We've got to spend the most of our time connecting with people, establishing that rapport, diagnosing needs. So just through the vulnerability and the intimacy of having a one-on-one with him every week and understanding his values at a core, that's where I was really, for me, was the synthesis of this human connection approach, even though outward appearance, he seemed to be pretty hardcore, and inside and out, he was hardcore, but he cared about humans and understood we had to connect with them to enroll.
Yeah, I really love what you shared there. That's very true of Chet. He actually was one of those guys. It sounds like cliche, but had a heart of gold. He had a gruff exterior, but he really did have a heart of gold. He really cared about the client, and he built a lot of lifetime relationships with clients too. That says a lot. So I think that's probably a good thing to hear, that just because you have a real go-getter mentality of huge goals for yourself, it doesn't mean you have to engage in this zero-sum game and try to take from people or push people to get what you need. And in fact, you're going to lose. Even back in the day, I think guys like you and I would argue that you would lose doing that anyway, but more so now than ever. Talk to us about the generational shifts that you've seen then. As you mentioned, that was a different context. It was a different time. The buyer was willing to maybe put up with some things from the seller that they will no longer put up with. Why don't you talk more about that, if you would?
Yeah, I mean, not only was sales that way back in the day, but buyers were accustomed to it. On a lot of those sales calls, you would hear comments like, well, you haven't closed me yet. I'm not sold yet. Mm-hmm. And it was just so fascinating because it was so inappropriate. And then you fast forward to today, when millennials make up the majority of the buying force, if you will, trust in sales professionals, like you shared that stat, is at an all-time low. And even for our parents' generation and our generation as Gen X, no one wants to be sold to that way anymore. It's completely unacceptable. In fact, we don't even answer the phone anymore. We don't take phone calls from people we don't know, let alone even those folks that we do. And it's a different time and place. You can even buy cars, right? The most old school sales methodology online without interacting with another human being. So much in the same way Chet was a pioneer at that time, really little known and understood in that way in terms of transforming how sales were made during those times. We're going through another shift, if you will, in the way that folks are buying, and the sales profession must transform and adapt to that shift or be left behind. That just doesn't work anymore.
So what are some of the biggest mistakes? You work with a lot of clients at different levels and types of business. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see being made? They may or not even be vestiges of old approaches to selling, but just where are we missing the mark here today?
I think where we're missing the mark is holding on to the old school strategies, right? So I'll speak first philosophically and then more tactically. But philosophically, it is my belief, and it has become my mission, that sales is a myth, right? The idea that we have to train, study, practice, learn techniques to manipulate people, or under the guise of influence them, or somehow put on this jacket and become this salesperson during the day and then take it off. It is my belief and mission that is a myth. What we really actually need to do through the demystification of sales is something other. Is we need to take that jacket off. We need to peel back that onion and understand the most important attributes in sales is our ability to connect with other human beings. So when you think about your most important relationships, your relationship with your wife, Rosina, or your children, or your parents, or dear friends, what are those characteristics? It's an ability to connect, to listen, right? We're not solving problems. We get in a lot of trouble. I'm speaking for myself, but maybe you too, when we offer up solutions. For me, it's solutions to my wife without listening and understanding. And why would we behave any differently when we're working with a prospect? We need to earn their trust and respect. I think the best definition I've ever heard of trust comes from Simon Sinek. He says, trust is a biological reaction that someone has our best interests at heart. So it is my belief that the sales professional's ultimate outcome is to create that level of connection with someone. And by doing that, earning their trust and respect, you can ask them questions and explore with them, not a level of their wants or what they think they want, but because you have that level of trust and respect, to go even deeper, to transcend to the level of their needs. And then borrowing that phrase from Chet Holmes, if your product or service meets their needs, their most important outcomes or results, you then have a moral obligation to offer your solution. But at the same time, what people lose track of is you have the same moral obligation if your product or service doesn't meet those needs, to let that person know, hey, I can't serve you. So that's the philosophy behind it. I think people are making mistakes by forcing and selling. I'm happy to get into some tactical ways as well, but really now more than ever, understanding it's not about sales, and really truly more than ever about relationships.
I love that. I love the fact that you're really giving a call to greater authenticity, which should be a sigh of relief. If you feel like you have to be a false version of yourself to succeed, I mean, how can you feel good about that? This is great news to the sales professional, I think, what you're saying.
Yes. Man, I love that. A greater call to authenticity. I'm gonna borrow that, my man, because I really appreciate how you synthesized it. So then you got to take that philosophy and say, when you talk about mistakes, this is where I see the most mistakes, whether it's in sales management, sales leadership, and the sales rep itself, him or herself, is sticking with those old techniques of cold calling, sending emails for the sake of sending emails. So as I work with new clients, across the last few years, there's still this adherence to checking these boxes. Okay, we made X number of dials. We sent X number of emails. But the truth of the matter is, again, if nobody is answering the phone, why are you making dials? If nobody is checking their voicemail anymore on these things, why are you leaving voicemails? And if no one's looking at their emails anymore, why are you sending emails? You're only doing it because it was once believed that 14 touches, 21 touches, 2,100 touches, whatever it is, would lead to the result. But I say, and where my experience has been the last few years, is let's let all of that go and let's focus on where are we connecting with folks. Yeah. Right or wrong, it's on text. So a good example, whether you're a sales leader or an entrepreneur, a business owner, or even a sales rep, is if you have a booked strategy session, a human interaction, one of the best things you can do where somebody's opted in and has given you permission to interact with their brand is send them an authentic video text, right? A real true, like they've raised their hand, they've scheduled the appointment. So if you want to improve your show rate, send them a welcome video. Hey, Jonathan, it's Neal from XYZ Company. I see where we're scheduled tomorrow at 10:30. I really look forward to connecting with you. My commitment is this will be the best call we have all year to grow your business. Fill in the blank, but meet them where they are. Or instead of calling them and leaving a voicemail, which no one's checking, if they don't answer, leave an audio text. So some of it's just common sense, but one of my mentors taught me once, not a well-known mentor, a gentleman by the name of Steve Lashansky, when common sense becomes common practice, the extraordinary will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So meet people where they are in an authentic way with their permission and add value. Be yourself, be human, introduce yourself. So those are some tactical suggestions I would make to overcome these most common mistakes that say, let's keep doing the activity. Let's keep checking the box in the CRM, send the emails, leave the voicemails. Like, nah, that's not common sense. No one's looking at those anymore. Meet them where they are.
Love that. Well, another thing that Chet used to say a lot was the one with the most passion wins. And
yes,
you don't convey a whole lot of passion when you're leaving some lame voicemail, but hey, if you take the step to actually put yourself out there and do that personalized video, I love that. And of course, everyone's a winner when you have a good offering to bring to market. So what are some other tips and tricks you would give that our methodology is more tuned to the way buyers want to interact today?
Well, so, this is transcendent, but even more important today is breaking down the tape, right? So if you remember back in the day with Chet, we would listen to audio recordings. I mean, shoot, in my one-on-one, I had the suction cup that went on the phone that went to a micro cassette recorder. Now more than, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I had the same thing.
Right? Now more than, and we're dating ourselves, but no matter. Now more than ever with COVID, all these meetings are on Zoom. You have an opportunity to interact with people face to face. And more than ever, the number one thing a sales professional can do and a sales leader manager is break down that tape, right? If you study the best of the best in sport, what are they doing? On the timeouts at halftime, when the offense is on the field, the defense is on those tablets, they're breaking down the tape, making the distinctions, and then going and implementing those distinctions back into the game. And Chet was ahead of his time back then. But now the most important thing we can do, whether it's manager-led or us individually, is take these Zoom recordings, look closely, see where we're adding value to that prospect, how they're responding to it, and take those learnings, distinctions, and then get them back out onto the field, if you will, back into the game with the sales calls, the sales interactions, or these Zoom meetings.
Well, I love that. That's going to take a real commitment from sales leadership. An individual producer, if he or she is highly motivated, of course you can do this on your own. But if there shouldn't be any push or shove with a manager, right? Would you agree that really has to come from leadership?
I was hoping you would go there, because that's another fundamental shift. Back in the day, there was this idea of sales management. We talked about activity. So managing activities. And that's what a manager did. But I would argue now more than ever, transcending management into leadership is the most important thing that needs to happen in a sales environment. So what do I mean specifically? It's that 80-20. Whether the title is sales manager or sales leader, they must spend 80% of their time coaching their sales professionals, working with them, growing them, and 20% of their time in admin and other stuff. And you said it best. It's like the sales professional could take that responsibility, him or herself, but you don't want to be wasting their time with unnecessary meetings or where people are talking about things, talking about calls. Now, start the week with a commitments retro meeting where the leader's holding the rep accountable for the targets and the stretch targets they're going to hit, why they're going to hit them, so that there's an ultimate why or reason for that rep. They take ownership for their numbers, retro back to it at the end of the week. And then any other time you're spending with them should be on coaching. Otherwise, leave them alone and let them serve the prospects and clients.
Yeah. I love that. You're drawing a distinction I think is really important between being a mere manager and actually being a leader. The management task seems like it is kind of down to checking boxes and just making sure activities are being done or not done, which leads to it's not so much accountability, it's just kind of like bugging people to do stuff too often,
exactly.
right? Where when you're a leader, you're holding, you can hold someone accountable when you have their respect. And a leader, I mean, if you don't have respect, you're no leader. But when you do have that leadership respect level, people will want to make you, pleased with their performance. They're going to want to do what you're doing, which means you probably need to be able to hop back on the phone, which something else we learned back in the day, right? A good leader will
Yes.
lead by example whenever called for. You can't do it every day, but whenever it's called for, you can practice what you're preaching. How important is that in this day and age that, sales leadership? I see a lot of people bringing in managers. They're just, they're responsible people. Maybe they're good at keeping the records and managing CRM and pipeline and all that stuff. That stuff definitely is important. But what are your thoughts on some of the shifts needed in that vein?
Couldn't agree with you more, Jonathan. And another myth, right? This idea that a good manager comes in, manages the activities, is a steward of the operational pieces, and reporting to the owner. And I've heard this all too often. Another mistake. This is a really good thread. Is, our best managers are salespeople who didn't quite sell well, but are really good at systems and structures. And that, the idea of demystifying sales is number one, but number two is this idea of a unsuccessful sales professional being a great manager. That's just a cop out and excuse for an owner or a leader deciding, I'm not going to work hard to find that needle in the haystack, because the best of the best sales leaders were top performers. They carried the bag. They earned the respect of their sales pros because of their results. And then ultimately, like you just shared, they're willing to get on the calls themselves and demonstrate the results. So if you're a business owner and a sales leader and you've got this myth that, I've got a good steward of the data and the systems, hunt now and find that needle in that haystack. That top performer is going to command so much more respect from your reps. And what your reps need more than a good steward of operations and activities is a coach, a leader, someone who's going to grow their capabilities to help them enroll more of the folks that need your product or service but aren't getting in that. And that's not going to come from a manager or somebody who is responsible for the activities.
And that person may have a role.
Yes.
They may have an important role, but I don't think it's not the leadership role. One of my favorite productions of the last couple of decades is Band of Brothers. And I'd read the book 2 or 3 times before that came out. So I'm a big World War II buff anyway. But there's a lot of leadership lessons in that. And one of them is just even the way the military, and I'm pretty sure they still do it today, the commanding officer is not the same guy who's pushing paper and making things happen in terms of the functionary aspect of their job. They have what's called an XO to do that part. And it's still a leader. They still take over drills and have a leadership function, but it's not the leader. And what if we started to structure our sales teams a little more like that? You've probably done some of that with some of your clients, I would imagine, Neal.
I have, because to your point, someone may be in that role and leadership, or ownership realizes that they may be a bottleneck, but they don't want to let go of a good person. And that's where things like sales enablement have come about. Also sales operations, or the higher version of sales operations would be revenue operations. So, dependent upon that individual's capabilities and understanding of the data, there may be other roles for them, but in the direct role to the sales professional, you want someone with a proven track record, carried the bags, produced results, is able to motivate and, most importantly, coach their pros to their best possible results.
Well, let's talk about applying some of the things we've been talking about here, Neal. So we've got a listener. Let's put him in a scenario, or her.
Yes.
And let's say she's got somebody that's not necessarily cut out to be a leader. Maybe she's like, man, I really agree with what you're saying here. And she's aware that her team needs to make some upgrades in their methodology. Maybe they still think that Glenn Ross is an actual positive movie about sales,
Yes.
which, just so there's no confusion, it's not a positive.
It's not anymore.
So what are her what are her steps? ABC. Could you walk her through what do you recommend to our listener who wants to make that transition?
Okay, so I think there's 2 important distinctions from what you've shared there. The latter I want to address first. In my experience, that business owner or that leader who still believes that Glenn Ross, or the old school pyramid of pitching, closing, overcoming objections, and closing is the way to go, you can't change that belief. And the good news for them is there's still plenty of folks who believe in that far, far less. I mean, that was the topic of our interview, is no one wants to be sold to that anymore. But what I found is, from that highest level of perspective, you can't convince that owner, that leader, to make that shift. The good news for folks like myself and the sales professionals that we breed, and many more in our space, is that there are enough clients and business owners who are seeing that shift, who are moving towards what we want. So that's something they have to overcome themselves. You can't make that change for them. The other piece, where you've got that sales manager who's, focused on, tasks and activities and things like that, you've got to find out, using science or tools, their capabilities. If they are more suited to activity and management, then it's potentially finding another role for them. So you can't, there's not a way to sort of shift somebody's superpowers from activity and management to leadership. And if that's how they're running, it's less likely that they've got those leadership capabilities. So I know it sounds kind of hard, but if they're close, or they've carried the bag in the past, what you want to do is meet with them, ask them questions like, hey, how can we get you into more coaching? Say if we were to cut half of your meetings where you guys are just talking about stuff, and instead at the end of the day, have you break down calls and tape, how confident do you feel in your ability to coach and grow your pros' capabilities? And if they're like, oh my gosh, I thought you never ask. This is really what I'd like to do, but I've been kind of pigeonholed into this role in this way, then you got a shot. But more likely, it may be taking your top performer and looking at having them start as maybe a player coach, leading and training that, have someone else manage the capability, the KPIs, the data, the activities, and then see where to go from there. Because you do need both, but nothing's going to have more impact on the results that the team is producing than to put a leader in place of a manager overseeing them.
Well, and as you mentioned, this may call for some shifts in your workforce, and that's why our show is proudly powered by Overpass. Overpass is one of the best platforms out there to quickly hire high-quality, pre-vetted talent for your sales team. Whether you need SDRs, customer service reps, or somebody to become a future AE, there are thousands of reps who've already put their CVs. You've got voice samples to listen to. You can assemble a list, interview, and hire people in days instead of weeks, and it's a shockingly low cost. You're going to love it. Go check it out. Set up your free account at overpass.com. So, Neal, you've given us so much good stuff here, brother. I want to squeeze you for a bonus round, okay?
Yes.
So could you give us, rattle off several, 3, 5, 8 things that sellers need to know that are different about their buyers? We've been talking about this generational shift and this old school approach to the buyer. Buyers don't want to be interacted with as they used to be. Could you give us some specifics and just rattle them off, man? Give us 3, 5, 8. Hit us with the bonus round.
Yeah. So, the number one thing is, rather than you coming in with what you do or your product or service does, is to have the discipline to step back and seek to understand, right? We've heard this quote so much, like, seek to understand before being understood. That's what this generation wants more than anything. And so to have the generations before shifted to that. So that's the number one thing.
Okay.
Don't waste time, pitching and presenting at them, and then do everything you can to really earn their trust and respect. So again, sending some sort of introductory, simple video text in advance. Don't waste time when you're getting on a call, saying, oh, I see you're in Tucson. How's the weather? Or, is that a picture of your family back there? Oh, I have 2 kids and stuff too. From the outset, connect with them about why, Jonathan, I'm curious, what led you to reach out and raise your hand? Why are we on this call today? Mm-hmm. So start right away with them and understanding what they want. But then your most important piece to do is to, when you feel like you've understood what they want, you've got to go deeper. Why is that important? What would that mean to you to have? So we've got to transcend wants to needs, and then needs to their most important results. So people aren't buying anymore for the thing your product or service does. They're buying for the result or outcome or transformation that your product or service creates in them. So you want to, as quickly and as real as and authentic as you mentioned, get to that, because that's what matters most.
Love it. Great stuff. Well, you've also brought a generous offer with you to the show today, Neal, and you were talking earlier about trying to make an assessment, see, what your potential might be for growing in leadership, what your potential might be in performing. You got an offer around that. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really took to heart in my work with Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins was the confluence of science and sales talent. And back in that day, it was always about sales personality, and more specifically, the DISC personality profile. Was somebody dominant? Were they influential, right? Well, personality is a really important piece, but I had the opportunity to go on site with Intermetrics and create what's turned out to be the missing link. And so I've got what's called your sales strengths identifier. And basically what it's looking for, what was missing in the past, are the attributes. So if you look at the makeup of a human and their ability to enroll or to sell, you've got to start with what talent or capabilities do they possess to enroll another human being. So there's 7 core areas of what we call our trust framework, which is to transform results by understanding and solving problems together. So the core pieces are your mindset, your ability to establish rapport, diagnose needs, build value around your solution, create buy-in, which is where the prospect tells you why they must move forward, and enroll. And then within that, there's 3 to 5 other sub capabilities. So all in all, the sales strengths identifier is an assessment, but the report that's produced out of it says, what are my sales capabilities? Then we can go to our drivers, our values. Why do I use the capabilities I have? What are my values and my motivators, right? So things like economic, leadership, individualistic. And then lastly, how do I use them is the behavioral piece. And so the confluence of the what, your attributes, the why, what drives and motivates you, and then your behavior has produced a real scientific ability to understand a human's ability to succeed in sales. Now, the great news is there are no perfect assessments. So coming full circle to my gift, this assessment is valued at about $1,000. I would love to offer it to your audience as a gift, and they can take that. It's a really powerful, meaningful report, 75 pages, a quick read, so that you can understand where specifically your strengths are, but most important, where your gaps are, and the ability to then close the gap. And for those of you that completed at this special link that we've set up for you and are interested in my input on how then to close those gaps, I'd be happy to spend some time with any individuals from your audience who take that assessment to understand how to transform their results.
Well, Neal, thank you so much. What a generous offer, and I'm kind of excited to take the assessment myself at this point. And we've definitely got the link in the show notes for those listening to the podcast episode. If you're viewing us online, you can see it right there on your screen to go get your free assessment. What's it called again? One more time, Neal.
It's called the Sales Strengths Identifier.
Okay, Sales Strength Identifier. Love it. And we can also find you online at ultimategrowthinc.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. And LinkedIn is always a great place to connect as well. I'm on all the socials, but I love interacting there. Got a lot of value for leaders, business owners, and sales professionals there as well.
Well, Neal Tricarico, you have not disappointed. I didn't think you would. You're a rock star. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I appreciate you, man.
That's going to do it, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.